So we are back in the twilight zone once again. China is cornering the US with a ton of heavy blows, but yet Trump is moving around like he has all the cards. Now, firstly, the deck is probably made in a Chinese factory. And secondly, you shouldn't try to bluff a civilization thousands of years old. They know every trick in the book. They wrote the art of war for crying out loud. China has brutal port levies on American ships, and that itself is an immense problem for US vessels and exporters all over the world. Now, let's not forget this: China will impose a $56 per metric ton levy on US ships docking at Chinese ports, and boy, do they have a network of ports around the world. China has investments and stakes in 110 ports across 67 countries. And this spans from China itself, Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and even within the US itself. Chinese state owned companies operate a huge portfolio of global ports. So if Beijing mandates the levies, US ships will get hammered. American exports will get clobbered. Now, notice that's just the situation with global ports. We all know about the rare earth disaster as well. China is already starting to throttle supplies to the US, and the response to this is full on panic from the administration. Now, Trump and friends, they are going around the world buying up stakes in rare earth companies. It's so crazy that rare earth stocks have increased by hundreds of percent in just a couple of months. It's insane. But the central problem facing Trump is not mining rare earths out of the ground. Rare earths are not rare. There's probably a boatload downstairs under my house. The crisis facing the US is the refining portion, and access to it is controlled by Beijing. Now, Trump has truly lost the plot here, and he believes he will start a rare earths mining boom. It's just so bizarre.
Before, but we are discussing critical minerals and rare earths, and we're going to be signing an agreement that's been negotiated over a period of 4 or 5 months. In about a year from now, we'll have so much critical mineral and rare earths that you won't know what to do with them. They'll be worth about $2.
Does the US have leverage in this game? Well, in my opinion, right now it's a strong no. Trump is playing with a disjointed hand with a pair of trees at the most. And what is the most basic rule when you're on the back foot? You don't go around betting the farm. You understand your constraints, you take the L, and you silently make plans. But the king of the world has more demands on China. You must do this, you must do that, and it's simply wow. Now, Trump has issued an ultimatum and a list of demands on live TV. Now, three big things are on the list: stop with the fentanyl, resume buying American soybeans, and back off with the rare earth restrictions. And if China doesn't, the US would likely re escalate the trade war. Beijing could see tariffs go back up to 100% or beyond. We could be back in triple digit land, guys. Now, the amount of backlash Trump is facing is immense, especially from US farmers and the soybean industrial complex. Now, when you have to threaten a cooking oil war, you know that things are really circling the toilet. The US can't afford for China to step away from soy exports, and if Beijing continues the squeeze, harvest will spoil. There'll be a lot of wastage, lost revenue, and farmers going into the red. Then the federal government will have to step in and start throwing bailout money, not just for a single season, but for many years to come.
Think they will make a deal on soybeans?
I do believe, yeah, because otherwise I'm not going to make a deal. No, I want them to buy. Our farmers have been boycotted by China as a negotiating point. I don't want that. Our farmers are great, and in particular our soybean farmers, and I want them to start buying soybeans at least in the amount that they were buying before. And I believe they'll be able to do that.
So Trump wants Beijing to buy soybeans at least in the amounts as before. But back then there wasn't a trade war, at least not to this extent, so the demand is truly moot. Chinese demand for US soybeans has been non-existent since June. It's not just about the cost of the goods. Brazilian and Argentine soy might be cheaper, but it's more about geopolitics. Now, Beijing has cut away 12.6 billion of potential revenue to the US, and this is forcing Trump to spend money on bailouts to keep the ship from sinking. Now, the Chinese have seen through this grand scheme of this entire trade confrontation. Remember what the tariff war is all about. It's a shuffling of money and extraction of cash from US consumers all the way to the federal government. China is not going to comply without heavy concessions this time. So the money from tariffs will be used to subsidize US industries, including farmers. US tariff revenue has hit an incredible $29.7 billion in September. But remember who's paying for it? Americans, the working class. At this rate, tariff revenue could exceed $350 billion in 2026 for the year. This trade war is basically one big excuse for Main Street to subsidize US industries in a very inefficient way. And let's get real here, you can't win a subsidy war against China, who has perfected it for decades. Chinese subsidies, their war chest is from their trade surplus. The US, however, is from debt and deficits. However, even that isn't enough, so the tariff war was conducted to transfer money from consumers to Trump's government and then to industries. And here's the trillion-dollar question: who can outlast the other? Can China withstand US tariffs and keep building up their tech and manufacturing base? Or can Trump take enough money from US consumers and allocate it correctly? Because the longer the tariffs drag on, the closer we get towards an economic implosion. China, however, can keep this up indefinitely. Chinese exports to the US have indeed crashed. We are down at least 20 to 30% from the peak in 2022. But China's exports to the world, total exports, are hitting new highs like never before. That means a consistent trade surplus from global trade can be funneled into Chinese industries. No excessive borrowing is needed, so Chinese bond yields are also kept much lower than the US. Local companies have breathing room to operate and to expand. So this is not exactly a waiting game that the US can win. China knows that. Their economy is improving by leaps and bounds. The entire complexity of the entire ecosystem, their economy, and all their products is about to exceed the US. Now, Harvard Growth Labs shows us how close China's economy is about to catch up. Chinese industries used to be ranked 37th in the world back in 1995, but in less than 30 years, it is just one spot below the US, and that is in 2023. Today, it's either on par or exceeds US industrial complexity. Now, yes, Trump has all the US AI tech, Nvidia, they have all the NASDAQ giants behind them. But China also have their own chip giants, EV giants, heavy industrial expertise, and clean energy tech. The trend is clear. Chinese industries, they are evolving up. US industries, they are devolving down. And speaking of those, let's turn to the mess between Europe and China. Now, we all know what went down last week. We covered how the Netherlands took control over Chinese chipmaker Nexperia for security reasons. Now, of course, China isn't happy, and they have the biggest lever to squeeze the EU if they choose to. And that is, of course, the rare earth supply cut. Now, we know Europe is heavily dependent on China for critical minerals, in some cases nearly 100%. Even when we zoom out, two countries supply Europe with the most rare earths. China at over 46% with 6,000 tons, and Russia at 28% with nearly 3,700 tons. China and Russia can easily turn off the taps, and there goes nearly 80% of the market for Europe. Even if Europe gets Malaysia to supply more, there is a limit to their refiners. Plus, more demand for limited quantities means higher prices. Can the EU industries endure a higher cost of production? No, they cannot. And that's why the collective EU is losing their minds. Brussels just issued a very harsh rebuke to China. Now, as if fighting against Russia wasn't enough, the EU wants to stand on their soapbox against Beijing. If sanctions against Russia aren't working, trying to intimidate China won't work. It's like throwing eggs on a brick wall. It's a grand waste of all the eggs.
The Indo-Pacific Ministerial coming up, and we are really reaching out to our Indo-Pacific partners, especially considering how China has now weaponized the supply chains, and really this is weaponizing the supply chains is a risk to the global trade. So we will discuss this also today.
Now, when it comes to industries, the EU has very few bright spots left. Most of the industrial sector is crushed under US tariffs, Chinese competition, and the energy crisis. ASML from the Netherlands is one such bright spot left. Now, thanks to the AI boom, they are getting record orders of lithography machines. Companies like OpenAI, they have struck deals for data centers and chips that exceed $1 trillion. And to make the chips, you need EUV machines from ASML. And that's why their share price is up by nearly 30% this year. Very impressive. However, take a step back. What do you need to make these machines? You need rare earth elements. ASML lithography machines are anywhere from 100 million to $500 million each, so they sell quality over quantity. And a single delay can be disastrous, especially if Beijing decides to ramp up the pain. The moment Nexperia was seized, a whole can of worms was exposed. If China can't make their chips in the EU, is there even a need to supply Europe with rare earths? And that is the big problem. Making these lithography machines requires more than just expertise and energy. You need rare earth elements, specific ones that China controls. Europe might have some stockpiles today, we don't deny that, but those would eventually run out. Lithography machines use neodymium and praseodymium for powerful magnets, dysprosium for precision models, and other rare earths like terbium and yttrium for other parts of the process are needed as well. Once again, I want us to remember one key point. Having all the rare earths dug up from the ground is nothing. You can have the genie from Aladdin conjure up a billion tons of rare earths and it still won't matter. You still need to transport it to Chinese refineries in China itself to get them processed. Even the genie doesn't know how to process it. All the expertise, all the secrets are locked up in China. And after the Nexperia debacle, all bets are off. The door could also be closed. And that's why the Dutch government is freaking out. Now, how do we know this is a concern for Europe, especially the Netherlands? Because the Dutch economic minister is scrambling to meet Chinese officials about the seizure of the chipmaker. And how do we know that China has the leverage? It's because the Nexperia's China unit is telling the staff to ignore orders from the Dutch HQ, to disregard orders from the Netherlands, and to follow local Chinese management. And here's the dangerous thing. Eventually, China will catch up in their semiconductor supply chain. And once they do, all these slides and all these seizures will be remembered. China can always make their own car chips and AI chips domestically. So an experienced supply shock won't be pleasant, but Chinese industries won't collapse. Europe is playing a very dangerous game and it just doesn't make any sense. At least the US is somewhat big enough to play some games. But the EU is trying to play checkers in a 3D chess match. This won't end well, not by a long shot. But let me know what you think. Will China really obey US demands? And why is Europe trying to corner China today? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through this economic apocalypse.